anti-Semitism, it is the natural extension of the self-loathing culture that these universities have propagated. So back when I was on campus, no, it was 2003 to 2007. It wasn't this bad, but this was the direction that things were going. And when you have a generation of young people, you tell them to go to Ben & Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some anti-Semitic sprinkles on top, it's no surprise that that's what they then spew back out. They're lost for purpose and meaning. So I don't think the right answer, Brian, is censorship. I know that's the direction that some may want to go. The right answer is leadership of these young people. Fill that vacuum of purpose and meaning. That's really what's missing amongst young Americans. And as a young person in this race, that's my job.
This topic is basically the worldwide protest and the establishment reaction. Fox News covers this topic where they're upset at this pro-Palestinian protest, what they call pro-Hamas or anti-Israel demonstration. And Ben Shapiro is one of those that has been going pretty ham on this issue, and this was just one of them. So I do want to rewind it just a little bit, and let's listen to the points that are made here, and then we'll take it from there.
In Tulane, I'm stunned seeing in Columbia, I'm stunned seeing in Cornell. You're the freshest out of college. It was 10 years ago for you, or 15 years ago for you. Was this the mission that you heard on campus?
This is a big part of what I exposed in Woke Inc., Brian. It is the denigration of our culture. And anti-Semitism, it is the natural extension of the self-loathing culture that these universities have propagated. So back when I was on campus, no, it was 2003 to 2007. It wasn't this bad, but this was the direction that things were going. And when you have a generation of young
you know people, what I'm always confused on these topics this topic about school. And this is a long time coming. Started hearing about homeschooling kids as a huge thing when I was working in Orange County out here in California, which I had never understood. But you hear a lot of homeschooling. You hear a lot of the colleges are doing something to our kids, and I've never been able to pinpoint tangibly what exactly are they talking about. They think that there's some sort of Marxist teacher that's teaching math. No, do you guys know what they're referring to? I'm sure maybe you may know a little more on this topic than me, but what exactly are they referring to when they were saying this? How are they being indoctrinated? Go ahead, Russ.
All right, Russ, you shoot first.
Yeah, they're not wrong, but they have their own agenda. And really what's happening now is a lot of what's been going on college campuses being taken to its logical conclusion. They're not wrong about that. It's just that I'm heartened by the fact that this ended up being the conclusion, because that's not what I expected. So to explain, you after the collapse within academia of Marxism, of economic Marxism, they shifted more towards what we would usually call identity politics. Mm-hmm. They borrowed a little bit from postmodern theory, although admirers of the originators of postmodernism will be eager to point out, and I agree, they kind of took what they wanted from it in order to justify their agenda. And they turned academia in many ways into activism with a point of view and an agenda. And it's, I'm sure just being in activist circles, you're familiar with a very willful rejection of a traditional kind of age of enlightenment, rationalist approach, which I think had defined a lot of the civil rights and social justice movements up until about the 90s. And I think the overall ethos could be defined as universal liberalism, the idea that we have more in common than not, that our common humanity binds us, content of your character, and so on.
So that's like a description, Russell, of the type of person? Because what I feel, just sort of analyzing this, is that there's a certain type of person that goes into education. Maybe I know maybe 8 or 9 teachers, people that went to high school that are actual teachers now. My brother used to be a substitute teacher. Like, I know it's a lot of teachers. I think you used to teach, Russ, or maybe you still do. But it's a certain type of person who's willing to let another person have their own ideas that goes into this sort of field. That a person who's willing to go, I believe this, and throw it out there to at least talk about it. It's a certain type of person. Like, I see the person who goes into schooling, liberal arts, or I want to be professor. They all seem to have a sort of liberal bent. You get what I'm saying? So is it the type of people that's doing this, or are they going there being changed? You get what I'm saying? Or are they already that person before they get there?
Well, for one thing, whether you think this is a good or a bad thing, it used to be, in keeping with what you're saying, it used to be about 70% of academics were liberal and about 30% were conservative. And now it's about 90-10. And that has created an atmosphere where there is absolutely no pushback on any of these ideas. My personal overall analysis on what's commonly been termed woke, very broadly speaking, is that a lot of the underlying ideas, like intersectionality, critical race theory, a lot of these ideas, if you go back to the originating texts, are not bad ideas. But they really got seized by corporations as a means of making people divide up along identity lines and to divert people away from any focus on economics or class. And that's how you wound up with an entire generation that thinks that who you like to fuck constitutes a politics. That's not a politics. But they've been convinced that that is the way to express yourself politically, to which I have always responded, if it were any threat to power, they wouldn't put it on the side of a Starbucks cup.
No.
You ever see a hammer and sickle on the side of a Starbucks cup? You never will.
Nope.
You never will. They put that on the side because they want youthful rebellion is the greatest threat to establishment power. So they picked up and elevated a bunch of, in my opinion, crackpot hustling academics who were looking to sell books and make a name for themselves by being as outrageous and controversial as possible. They elevated them because it suited their purposes to put these people out front who were preaching a very divisive, very warped version of some very good ideas. Now, when I look at this, and this has been the angle we've been seeing it from, very much the opposite of Vivek. Because, yes, some of Vivek and some of the other, what we would call right-wing commentators' critique of this school of thought is not completely off base, but they have their own purposes. We just saw this week where DeSantis wants to shut down speech in Florida. Nick tweeted out, you see, they never really cared about free speech. It's true. So while they might have a valid critique of this type of academia, they're only elevating this for their own purposes, and their purposes as well are to distract from economics, right? There's a mutual interest in talking about this bullshit and distorting these core ideas of critical theory. But they created a Frankenstein. They never saw this coming. They spent 10, 20 years telling kids in these schools, decolonize your mind, decolonize the curriculum, decolonize the canon. It never occurred to them that if a colonial war broke out that they wanted to back, that after telling them for 20 years to decolonize, that these kids were not just going to go along with the narrative. And that is why you're seeing, in my opinion, you have not seen this kind of conflict between the establishment and not just youth. You're talking the youth at the elite universities. You're talking about the youth who were being trained to replace. Exactly. Exactly. It's like Vietnam. Exactly.
Precisely.
Go ahead, kid. Go ahead, kid. I know you've been itching to chime in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Russell. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Yeah, Russell.
No, go ahead.
Finish your thought. Okay. Well, listen, I do want to hand it back to Russell because I mean he's breaking everything down perfectly. But let's look at the imagery here because again, Russell did a fantastic job in talking about the academic part. But look at the imagery of what we're seeing on social media, the absolute destruction that's taking place in Gaza. it cannot be denied what we are witnessing here, and that is a full-on extermination. Now,
Right.
the situation that took place October 7th, I'm going to keep my opinions to myself. I don't want this channel to get flagged on YouTube, but I mean, I find just how it all took place very suspicious with all those cameras and everything else, but that's about it. It's how the intel services didn't see this coming, and weapons in Ukraine also being found there supposedly is a whole other Pandora's box altogether. But when we see women and children, civilian centers being destroyed, and the pushback from people in Europe, in America, in Canada, people are saying, hey, call for a ceasefire. And we have our own liberal politicians, including AOC, Bernie Sanders, Fetterman, all the heavyweights, all trying to tiptoe around the issue, but can't really say anything because they know that they take their marching orders from the Democratic establishment. And of course, yes, AOC and the squad have asked the Biden-Harris administration to do a ceasefire, and yet that's not taking place. But the people are seeing this, and no one wants to witness firsthand an extermination of the people. But that's what we are seeing here in Gaza. That is what we are seeing with the bombings that are taking place. And in many ways, the establishment and corporate media, they really can't push back what they used to do in the 90s and early 2000s. All of that is gone. All of that charisma, all of that, I guess, goodwill of the populace, or assuming that people would fall in line, has evaporated due to so many other factors, because we have saw how our politicians and our establishment have constantly been lying to us and manipulating us for decades on end. It's just not going to work. And I'm rather surprised, to be honest, the amount of pushback we are seeing from people who are saying, hey, call for a ceasefire. Because I guess when Biden got into office, just from my perspective, I assumed the anti-war movement and all these other activist groups just died down and disappeared. They all just laid down their arms because for many of them, it's unthinkable to protest against Biden. But here they are. I kind of want to know where they were at the whole time, but I guess better now than never. And everyone's seeing that Biden can be just as heartless as Donald Trump. Dare I say it, even worse than Donald Trump when it comes down to a global crisis, where not only that, we have Janet Yellen saying we could afford 2 wars. So there we go. We have the money for that.
All right, so I'm gonna let it play for a little while, and we're gonna comment before we move to the next segment. And let's go.
People, you tell them to go to Ben and Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some anti-Semitic sprinkles on top. It's no surprise that that's what they then spew back out. They're lost for purpose and meaning. So I don't think the right answer, Brian, is censorship. I know that's the direction that some may want to go. The right answer is leadership of these young people. Fill that vacuum of purpose and meaning.
Right. Let's get into the Ben Shapiro
video. And as a young person in this race, that's my
Ben
job
Shapiro,
to actually
Folks,
do.
America's universities have been a garbage heap for decades, but donors have been looking the other way because, after all, they love their alum associations. They love giving back. And now here's the problem. At a certain point, the rubber hits the road, and it turns out the people you're donating to hate your guts. The interpolation of terrorist supporters in the West continues apace. You know, the reality, which is that there are a lot of people who support terrorism and anti-Semitism all over the globe, that is not relegated to foreign countries. That is very true here in the United States as well, which is why you are starting to see some donors at major American universities look at the universities and realize exactly what it is that they've done. The universities have full-scale embraced the decolonization narrative. That narrative started with people like Franz Fanon back in the 1950s and 1960s, claiming
what can be the ramifications, Russell, of donors not donating as much money to universities? Does it change, I guess it would change scholarships, but outside of that, does it change what teachers can be hired, how much they are paid? Do you know any details about that? Go ahead.
Well, this is the dimension of it that Ben Shapiro and Vivek are not identifying, either out of ignorance or because it doesn't fit the narrative that they want to pump up, because they hated the whole idea of decolonization and everything. For anybody who knows the nuances of what goes on the left, broadly speaking, the fake left, the real left, all of that, what they're not addressing is the establishment left, the Democrats, the so-called left. This is Frankenstein turning around to kill its creator, because they fed them. He's not wrong about this. They fed them all this decolonization stuff, never expecting it to amount to anything. That's what he's not going to address. That's the perspective he lacks. They loved encouraging them to embrace that narrative as long as it wasn't going to cut. What did they do? Did they defund the police? No, they increased the police funding. You can go have your BLM cakewalk through the middle of town. They didn't give a fuck about that. Now, you have not only encouraged them to see things through a very different lens regarding colonial powers attacking native peoples, but you have also encouraged them to march, and you have also, frankly, encouraged political violence. There has been a lot of political violence in the name of causes that they believe in. Riley Gaines, she's an activist against transgender athletes in women's sports, and whatever you think about that. There was a big incident where they had her trapped in a classroom for 3 hours. This is a few months ago. We covered this. Nobody got arrested. Nobody got expelled. Brett Weinstein, when he got driven out of Evergreen College by rioting students, nobody got arrested. Nobody got expelled. So now, yes, legitimately, right here in New York, Cooper Union, they had Jewish students trapped inside of a library, and they're showing all of these videos. Oh my God, this is so horrible. Well, okay, you've been encouraging this for years. You have been sending the message to these students that that is an appropriate way to handle political disagreement, and you didn't mind as long as it was not messing with your agenda. You liked it, right? Because it was keeping them fighting over shit you don't even care about. Like they care who swims, right? Like they care about who uses what bathroom. They don't give a shit. Now, the monster is coming off the table and coming back to attack the people who made it. And that's a subtlety they're not going to address. Even if they understand that, it doesn't fit their narrative because they want to hang this on the Democrats. This is not what the Democrats want. Clearly, they're up there.
Not at all.
And they can't control them either. And
they lost control of it, and you can see how desperate they are. Biden talking about cracking down using the power of the federal government. I mean, this is scaring the living shit out of them. And this is their own, exactly like Vietnam. These are not just kids from SUNY. These are kids from Harvard. Mm-hmm. These are kids from UPenn. This is scaring the shit out of them. But it's you can't tell people for 20 years that it's bad when European colonizers, and look, man, I mean, you look at Netanyahu, that cat's not from the Middle East. I'm sorry. You look at these European colonizers beating up on these, they're putting out all this. I don't know if you're getting this on YouTube. I'm getting all these Israeli ads trying to talk about. I
haven't looked at it to notice. I haven't even.
Man,
it out. I'm gonna do that.
It's so sleazy because they're getting these beautiful women, and I'm looking at it. And I'm like, you're just reinforcing the point, man, because they look like Polish girls with a tan to me. Yeah, they don't look like no Middle Eastern girls that you're putting in these.
Don't fall for it. She's too pretty. She's too pretty, and she won't be into you, man.
I don't know a lot of Semitic people with blonde hair and blue eyes, man. I don't think it goes down that way. So you're just kind of reinforcing the point. Right. But they've spent decades telling them rightly, hey, look at Fanon, look at Edward Said, look at the consequences for the people who are colonized of colonization. And then you expect them to all line up behind an occupation and a genocide. How did you think these kids were going to react? It was just too much cognitive dissonance. And I will say, as somebody who has critiqued the identity politics, and I've always said when we've critiqued it, not because I disagree with the core idea, But because of the way it's being used and because the people who are espousing it, their politics are a mile wide and an inch deep, they don't mean any of this shit. What I'm seeing now, is making me eat my words. This actually redeems a lot of that movement in my eyes, personally.
Also, it's important to note, too, that the fact that the Democrats are, okay, let me start over again. Sorry about that. Just, again, Russell, you're hitting a lot of the points. But the fact that, we've been saying to our audiences and anyone that was maybe critical of us as well, that the Democrats are not your friends. The Democrats have shown, for a matter of fact, that they are just as warlike and just as indifferent in regards towards corruption, abuse of power, and so much more. And the fact that we see that, or at least maybe hopefully these protesters, these young people do see for the fact that, look, AOC is not your friend. Biden's not going to listen to you. Bernie is going to be a cuck. They never believed in a damn thing that they said, and maybe people now are waking up to the fact that, oh, geez, if I vote Democrat, nothing's going to change. Because I have to ask you two this. Can you imagine the absolute pushback if Trump was in office and this was happening under his watch? Because I know for a fact so many people would be out there in the streets right now.
Yeah, it'd probably be a lot more.
This is happening under Biden's administration, and this is putting a lot of people who are vote blue no matter who, or were bullied into voting for Biden, or who are liberals or anything of that matter, into a very interesting little quandary. This is exactly the same thing Trump would have done. Maybe he would have held it back more so, but the fact that it's happening under Biden, it's taken away everything that they said in 2020. Nothing is different. In fact, it's far more frightening because the Democrats are saying, like, okay, they're telling Israel, hey, ceasefire, please, pretty please. Please don't punch that person in the face. Please don't break their skull open. Oh, you're breaking their skull open. This is so terrible. There's nothing I can do. Oh, gee willigers. Maybe this will wake people up. So if you're a liberal, if you've been critical to due dissidence, Hard Lens Media, or RBN, it's okay. We welcome you. Finally, you see the Democrats for who they are. You don't have to be scared of the orange boogeyman. It doesn't matter. You don't have to rely on electoral politics anymore. We welcome you in. Finally, hopefully you see the light, because nothing is different under a Democratic president or a Republican president. And hopefully people do wake up to that fact. That would be a sight to see. Hopefully that will be the conclusion that everyone sees with the amount of pushback these protesters are getting.
All right, gentlemen, let me get through this. Now, this is some good stuff coming up. I'm going to play this part and then move to a different video before we close this segment.
And they are rising up against the institutions of the West. It's not an attack on Israel. It's an attack on Western institutions as Western institutions. A lot of people who are sort of liberal, hollow men, fellow travelers, were fine with this for a long time because they thought, okay, well, we also, we don't love the institutions, and it buys us some street cred with the left wing if we pretend along. The hollow men, fellow travelers, the people that Tom Wolfe described in a very famous essay written in the late 1960s called Radical Chic, that party at Lenny's, which was all about Leonard Bernstein.
Now, what do you know, Russell, about this book, Radical Chic, that he's referring to?
I have that right up behind me. Radical Chic is funny, man. You should read that. It's very, very interesting. It's Tom Wolfe was a really great kind of observational journalist. And it's about, Leonard Bernstein, the composer. So he's, a New York liberal guy. And back then, you would have all these very rich Upper East Side Manhattanites who would, invite Black Panthers and have a fundraiser for them. Mm-hmm. And I believe that essay coined the phrase radical chic. And it was describing these very wealthy people who like to be in the company of radicals, but it was a performance. And that essay captures that very well. Like the way they described Leonard Bernstein behaving with these Black Panthers and the way the Black Panthers try to negotiate that. When you read something and you get embarrassed, even though you're not in this situation, like Leonard Bernstein, he yells at the Black Panthers, "Does it bother you that you're living there in the ghetto and we're living here like this?" And, they're trying to get money out of these people, so they can't be like, damn right. So you know, they give a very diplomatic answer. They're trying to defuse it. He's, well, it makes me angry. I would highly recommend it. It's two essays. It's Radical Chic and Mau Mauing the Flag Catchers.
Right on. All right, so let's listen to this part of the same video. I have different parts marked, so let's listen to what he says here.
Press.
Actually, Hamas started this whole thing. Remember October 7th? Actually, that's wrong. Before October 7th, Israeli security forces killed 248 Palestinians, and 40 of them were children, and that was just this year. And if you want to go back further than that, we can look at the recent history of war crimes committed by the Israeli government. Operation Protective Edge in 2014, Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, Operation Cast Lead in 2009.
What started each one of those operations? Islamic barrages of rockets into civilian centers in Israel. That's what started each one of these operations. I love this moron. I guess the idea here is that, if you point out that what has caused the current conflict is the massacre of 1,500 Jews, like, well, you know, before that, Israel killed other Palestinians. And you're like, yeah, but why would they do that? And the answer is because they were associated with terrorist groups. And he's like, yeah, but what about the conflict before? Oh, you mean because the terrorists were firing rockets into Israel? It's an infinite regress of dumb here. Just name a bunch of operations without actually explaining why the operations were initiated.
Yeah, but you don't mention why Cast Lead happened. Hamas fired rockets into Israel. And that was because Israel broke the ceasefire agreement they had on November 4th, 2008, while the entire world was in euphoria over the United States electing its first black president, Barack Obama. Israel used the opportunity to break the ceasefire agreement and raid Gaza and kill Palestinians.
For no reason, they're just raiding Gaza, just for fun. They just raid Gaza. To do what exactly? To steal their nothing? What would the raid in?
I find it hard for people not to understand, specifically a younger person, not to understand this perspective. And it's just hard for me to believe that Ben Shapiro believes some of the things that he's saying if he wasn't making a lot of money for what he does. It just doesn't feel like anybody at his age should have this sort of outlook, because it's anti-history, it's anti, chronological history, is anti-factual. It's almost like in order to have this sort of opinion, you have to be a person who only watches legacy media and don't have the internet and don't have other friends who are, you know what I'm saying? It's just bizarre for me. A person at his age could still be in this place. Keaton, I'll give you a word before we close this segment. And we were just talking about the worldwide protest and how the establishment, they really don't know what to do. But what's saying, Keaton? Go ahead.
No, that's 100% right. By the way, for those in the chat, the reason I was late is because I just came from a protest in March, and there was actually a guy who, one of the last speakers at the event, made this exact point, that it's important that people converse with friends, with family members, but also that they use the internet, use social media, keep getting the word out because it's working. He came, because look, obviously this is, you talk about disaster, you talk about genocide, you're talking about a world historic human, catastrophe. And it's very easy when you go to this event, you're just overwhelmed with sadness. Yes, it is inspiring to be amongst people who are like-minded and to see that you're not alone, but obviously the context in which you're all gathered is just horrible. And in this particular event, there were quite a few people there who spoke very, very personally about ways that they themselves had suffered. But then there was this guy toward the end who said, look, I'm going to try and give us some good news, which is that we are getting the message out. And it's important to keep getting the message out, use the internet, use social media to get the message out, because he made this point that, the mainstream media has been caught off guard by this. I don't think they were expecting this. Biden's approval rating dropped 11 points within his own party in the past few days, basically. And so, that's what the real use of these protests are, We covered on our show, last night, God, seems like forever ago. But we covered on our show last night this article where there was this Hollywood filmmaker who spoke with anonymity to The Intercept, and he was kind of divided. Well, do I speak out and say what I know is right, or do I hold my tongue? Because if I speak out, I might forfeit my career for ultimately what, right? Because ultimately, is my speaking out going to save a single Palestinian life? And of course, no one person's voice is going to save anybody's life, but collectively, we may save some lives if we can get this violence under control a day sooner. That's hundreds of lives saved, right? That's hundreds of families who are at least less shattered than they would be, although being that Gaza is a place with very large families, it's almost inconceivable that every family comes out of this completely intact. That's just the horror of this. But it's
kind of like a
this,
Holocaust.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You could say
absolutely.
it's a Holocaust.
You could say it's a Holocaust, 100%. But the other main point that he made there, and that I've made on the show, and that I will echo here, is that signaling to each other that we're not alone is important, because that builds morale, that builds solidarity. It gives us a reason to communicate the message further, and there's no question that the political establishment, the media, have been taken off guard by the overwhelming support for the people of Gaza in the face of this horrific event. They thought this was going to be like America 2002. And if you look at the Fox News coverage, it is. It's amazing how after Trump, after all this populism, after all the Fox News people talking about how, well, Trump is the anti-war candidate, which means Fox is now the anti-war network. It's amazing how they can just, like that, turn back the clock, and now it's 2002 all over again on Fox News. It's the same exact atmosphere. Anyone who has any criticisms of Israel is pro-terrorist, they're pro-Hamas, they're traitors, dissent should be crushed. Like, they are back to their Bush-era ways over on Fox News. And I don't watch much of this stuff anymore. Like, CJ, I'll take your word for it, because you say, on CNN and MSNBC, they're not talking about this much anymore. I don't watch this. I don't watch TV news anymore. But it makes sense because, on Fox, they are able to just take that, hardcore, neocon Republican position that's less of a pivot, I guess. But it's kind of surprising because I was very curious how the media was going to react to this, and it seems like, if what you're saying is right, like CNN and MSNBC are just kind of treading lightly. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah,
like I said, I haven't watched much.
like they're not directly. They're just kind of referencing it as part of something else, but they're really trying to avoid it. They'll say stuff like, what's happening in Israel, and then they'll talk about what Republicans, for example, there was a segment today talking about how the new speaker is going to be getting this money to Israel, and it was saying how they're all on board with the money to Israel, but they're not on board with the money to Ukraine. And then they said this opposite, and they said the money for Ukraine, Democrats are all on board, but the Republicans are not. And they just made a small reference when they was talking about that, and they said, yes, the Democrats are divided, as we saw this weekend. And that was it. It was no showing or what do you mean by that? It was just a reference like that. And that's largely what I've been seeing on, MSNBC and CNN. Definitely not showing footage. Definitely not showing footage of them protesting. Definitely not doing that.
Wow.
Right, because Fox, they could use it to sort of attack it. Right?
Well, right. Well, yeah. I mean,
on MSNBC, they can't really attack it without alienating some of their viewers. I mean, I guess so. If the numbers are accurate, which apparently, Biden did lose 11 points within his own party. That just came out, a few days ago.
So apparently some cowbell leftists are are anti-Zionists at least, apparently.
Do a follow-up
But go ahead.
interview with the
Somebody's
cowbell
gonna
guys.
chime in. Somebody's
Well,
gonna chime in. Go ahead.
there you didn't see the Ben Shapiro clip we were playing. It's their analysis of what's going on between the Democrats and these protesters is pretty much the same analysis we've had on our show. The difference is they think it's a bad thing, and we think it's a good thing. They're looking at that and saying, you've encouraged all this, and we're saying, oh, wow, it actually stuck. It actually penetrated. They're actually willing to really take a stand at a moment when it actually counts. Wow, never saw that coming. And for them, it's, you see, you encourage these kids with that decolonization stuff, and now look what you get. But their analysis is not wrong. It's just their conclusion that's
Yeah.
leaves something to be desired.